Are you wondering what team you should rebuild next in NHL 25 franchise mode? Well, today, guys, I have 6 teams categorized into 3 difficulty buckets for you to choose to potentially take on for your next franchise mode save. Without further ado, let's jump into the easy teams. Our first team in the easy category are the Anaheim Ducks. This is a team that has plenty of elite talent on the horizon with Leo Carlsson, Mintyukov, Gauthier, McTavish, and even Trevor Zegras. This is after the February 4th roster update. He is dropped to a low elite, but guys, he still has his X factors. He's still an 82 and he's still 23. If you give him first line ice time and play him a ton and he gets a good amount of points in year number 1, maybe year number 2 as well, you should see his overall rise. He's still a great playmaker, not the best defensively, but still a guy that could become an elite player. And you've also got Seneke here in the pipeline. He's got high top 6 forward. Those guys are not very common, as well as Gosher here. You've got another 72, 20-year-old, right? He might make it into your top 6. You still have Troy Terry. He was signed to a pretty solid contract for an 86 overall, and he's only 27, so he can stick around as a sniper that could help contribute when Leo Carlsson and Gauthier and McTavish and all those guys start to develop. You do have plenty of depth as well in Strome and Vetrano, and even Killorn. That contract's not great, but that's about your only bad contract. And you take a look at the rest of the blue line, you've got Zellweger, Lacombe, Luneau, a bunch of prospects, as well as Trouba currently. Yes, his $8 million for the next 2 seasons isn't too bad, but I'll show you guys the contract screen in a second. It's not going to hurt your future as a team, and currently, it's not a great decor. You're not going to win anything really year 1 with the Anaheim Ducks, but you do have plenty of talent and players that will develop into those stars for you. And maybe in year 2, maybe in year 3, you can have a great run at the cup after some shrewd moves from you. And then the goaltending tandem is really well balanced. You've got Dostal, who's an 85 at 24 with medium starter potential, and you've got John Gibson. If you're ready to turn the reins over to Dostal, you can move Gibson. He's got a modified no-trade clause, meaning you're able to trade him to certain teams that he says is acceptable. And even if you wanted to keep him, having 2 85s, making only $7 million-ish as your tandem is certainly, there's worse goaltending situations out there. And we take a look at their contract situation. You can see the expiring contracts in year number 1. Really, it's Mason McTavish, and you can sign him for as long as you feel like he'll be valuable. But an 84, 21, medium elite power forward that's currently playing on the second line, could play on the first line if you so decide, is fantastic. You also have to give Dostal a contract, so maybe that's worth moving on from John Gibson after the season. But at least as far as the contracts in the future, you can see Trouba's contract, even Zegras' contract are probably a bit of an overpay, maybe even Gudas's. But by the time you need to sign some of your medium elite players, they will be off the books. Taking a look at their contract situation, Carlsson, Gauthier, Mintyukov, and even Zegras all expire after the next season. So you can really reshape the future of this team. You might be able to get rid of Killorn at that point. Maybe you can talk to him about his no-trade clause, but $6.25 million, it's an overpay for a guy like Killorn, but that's your only bad contract. That's the only thing holding you back. You can move Strome on day 1, so should you want to. Vetrano, Fab, like there's no bad contracts on this team besides that Killorn contract. You have total flexibility to treat these stars and just pay them and give them the right talent around him. So Anaheim, I think, is a great team if you want to skip the tanking phase and just get straight to building up a bunch of 20, 19, 21 guys in that range. Take them from their average NHL status at 82, 83 and make them all into 90 overalls and lifting multiple Stanley Cups. Our second team in the easy category is the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Columbus Blue Jackets are having a great year by everybody's standards and what they expected them to have in real life. And in the game, it's replicated based on their team's composition. You've got Zach Werenski, who is your number 1 stud on the blue line. 4 years at under $10 million. For an 89 with some X factors, he is one of those guys that is going to be a rock on the blue line for you. And to go with him, you've guys got Kent Johnson and Adam Fantilli, who are currently NHLers, a bit better than some of those guys in Anaheim. So this is that Eastern Conference team of the easy bucket for you. 85, 84 in their perfect age to just absolutely take off. A power forward and a playmaker. Kent Johnson has all the makeup to be your number 1 center for years to come. And by the way, they are making dirt cheap contracts for the first couple seasons. So maybe you can load up and get some really elite talent to surround them with in year number one. But we don't stop there. You've got Caden Lindstrom here as well, 1876 medium elite. One of those guys that maybe in 2 years is already ready to be in your top 6. You've got Sean Monahan, who, yes, has a no movement clause, but an 85, making about $5.5 million till he's 34 isn't the end of the world. You've got Kirill Marchenko, whose contract is fantastic. Just slightly below $4 million, 3 years left. He'll be 27 at the end of the deal with high top 6, 86, a sniper to go alongside of Kent Johnson's playmaking X-Factor abilities. That is a 1-2 punch where maybe you could even load the line and put Fantilli with Johnson and Marchenko and get the power forward playmaker sniper combination that everybody is dying for. And then you can see there is still some more talent as well with Chinikov and Matichuk. We'll now take a look at the goaltending, which is admittedly a bit weaker, right? Elvis Merzlikins is not what you look for in a number 1 goaltender. And he's got a no trade clause that you can work around. It's modified, right? So he doesn't have trade protection against every team. $5.5 million, not the greatest. Taking a look at the blue line, I think it's a very solid, well-paid blue line. Nothing too crazy. You've got Matichuk to come up maybe someday. Fabro, if you play him and he gets enough points, he could jump in this last season of growth. Yes, Damon Severson's contract looks to be a bit, risky. 30-year-old guy making 7 years, $6.3 million. But if you take a look after the 3rd year, you can move on from a guy like Damon Severson. He'll be 33, 34. Then all of a sudden he's got a 20-team no trade clause, and you can easily move him off the books. This $6 million, I think, is about fine for an 85 overall. You've got Ivan Provorov, who doesn't have a contract extension, so you'll have to navigate that one. But an 85, similar to Severson, right about in his prime, there's a good mix of talent. And then I've already touched on a couple of the guys coming up, but you got Delbel Baluz as well as Brinley and Jordan Dumais, right? Jordan Dumais, low elite. I know it's a 73 at 20, but low elites, if you give them ice time, they will develop, and you could have another stud young sniper on your hands. And when looking at the immediately expiring contracts, really the only guy is Provorov. Voronkov here, he's a pretty average, a 3rd liner, maybe could develop into a 2nd liner. Dante Fabro, same thing there. A bottom end defender that could develop into that middle pairing guy for you. But you have really, really good contract flexibility throughout. I mean, nobody here is really locked up for a gross contract for way too long. Yes, some of these guys maybe you wouldn't want to give Severson or Monahan those contracts, but they can certainly be worked around. Marchenko, obviously being your 5th highest paid player at 3.9, has potential to grow. There is so much opportunity for you guys to really put your stamp on this team, make some moves, and especially with these contracts for Fantilli and Johnson, maybe you make a run at a guy like Mikko Rantanen in free agency, should he get there, or anybody that gets to year 1 free agency. You could have the flexibility to go out and give a big contract in year number 1. And if you wanted to go out and find yourself the goalie of the future, it's not Elvis Merzlikins. I recommend going out and grabbing any one of these 5 players, especially for a team like the Blue Jackets. These are all goaltenders that have medium elite potential, are in the low 80s, and are in their early 20s. They sync up timeline-wise perfectly with Fantilli and Johnson and the rest of the talent coming up on the Blue Jackets. Not to mention, most of them have really reasonable deals, right? Wolf is signed for another year after the first season for less than $1 million. You've got Askarov and Wallstedt making just about $2 million. Devin Levi will need a contract extension, and Spencer Knight is signed for the most amount currently at $4.5 million for the next 2 years, but salary cap isn't really an issue for you in the immediate future. These guys all have the potential to become a top of the league, top 5 goaltender for you, and the cost is relatively cheap considering the amount of talent and draft picks and just what you would have to give up to get them. I think it makes sense for you as the GM of the Columbus Blue Jackets to go after one of these 5 goaltenders. So now we move on to the slightly more difficult challenges, those in my medium difficulty bucket in the Western Conference. We are going to take a look at the St. Louis Blues. I think this team is decent. They've got really no... it's not like they have a ton of depth as far as elite talent, but they've got Thomas and Kyrou who are about to hit their primes. High 80 overall players signed for the same contract for 7 years. That's really not that bad, especially with the cap going up as quickly as it does in NHL 25. I think it actually goes up higher in real life. But the thing is, you're going to need to find a way to surround them with talent. And Kyrou, Thomas, those are the guys that you're looking for when you're building a cup-winning team. but you need to surround them with some more forwards. You can see that it does fall off pretty quickly. You've got Buchnevich, who is on an expiring deal, does have a 6-year, $8 million extension, but has the no trade clause. So if you wanted to move him, it'd be selective, but he's still a good enough player for that middle six. Maybe $8 million could be a little bit more than you wanted, so you could move him. You've got Holloway and Neighbors, who, if you can develop them, will be great second liners for you, but you're missing that third running mate of the Kyrou Thomas tandem, right? You need that third guy for that top line, or potentially you split them up and then surround him with a lot of talent. But you can see that talent isn't really here right now. You've got Shen, who's making 6.5 for 4 more years, probably a contract you'd like to move, but you can't, right? The no trade clause, unless you can get him to waive it and bully him into it. If you have morale on, I don't recommend doing that. You could absolutely make him a negative asset, so sometimes it might be better off just sticking pat. Sundqvist is fine, but you've got depth guys that are making, a decent amount of money. Joseph, Foxa, Tessier, right? Some of these guys are not guys you would love to pay. Dalibor Dvorsky is probably your next wave of talent coming up, and as a matter of fact, we'll take a look at the rookie skaters right now. As far as the next wave of talent, it's all right. Stenberg, Jirasek on the blue line, Bolduc. These guys are all in their late teens, early 20s, so they definitely have room to grow. But as far as the guys that I'm really banking my hopes on for the future, it would have to be Dalibor Dvorsky. You look at the goaltending tandem, too. You've got some decent potential for growth with Hofer. Obviously, Binnington is your number one right now. It's not a immovable contract. You've got 3 years at $6 million, which is not bad. For an 84, might be a bit expensive, but with that modified no trade clause, guys, you are able to move him to, 18? Yeah, he's got 18 teams on his no trade list in year number 1, so you can trade him to 14 teams. Surely somebody's going to bite on a goaltender like this. And then the D-core is average, but a little expensive. If we take a look at just sorting by overall, you can see everybody's making $4 million. Like, everybody's making $4 million. And the problem is most players here have no trade protection, so you're kind of stuck with them unless you can bully them into waiving that no trade clause, or maybe you get lucky and they do it the first time, but it will hurt morale if you have it on, which is what makes this a more difficult challenge than some of the other ones. Not as difficult as some of the ones coming up in our hard category, but Cam Fowler, I know they acquired him in real life, but I see the fit. I guess I understand why. He adds more depth, but as far as a guy that could be moved, 32-year-old, 84, only 1 year left at $4 million. For the guys, if you don't want to bully the other guys, Cam Fowler's probably the most sense to move, free up some cap space. Broberg, 83, 23, medium top 4, could definitely be a guy that you play on the top line as a two-way defender. Looks really well-rounded in all of his categories. Another year at $4.5 million, then you'll have to sign him. You'll really know what he is at that point. Nick Leddy, same thing. 2 years, it's not worth moving on from, in my opinion. I think that contract's fine, but it's the Torrey Krug contract, or even the Justin Falk contract. That one's probably a little bit better. It's probably Torrey Krug that I'm looking at. We'll take a look at the contracts here in just a second, but the D-core, pretty average. It's not cup-winning D-core, and it's pretty much locked in. And another thing with the St. Louis Blues, you are lacking quite a few draft picks. You are missing pretty much every pick outside of your first rounder in the first year, and you're missing your second round pick next year. Those picks, the thirds, the fourth, the seconds, those are fantastic pieces to move in game for players that are young, that have depth, that have good contracts, and you're missing your second in 2027 as well. You are not looking flush on picks. You're missing your third in 2028. So you do not have the luxury of a ton of picks to just be dishing out to get rid of these contracts or to get younger, more elite talent. So St. Louis firmly in that medium difficulty bucket. And well, the good news is if you really wanted to keep the team around, you could. There's not many guys expiring. It's Foxa, it's Sutter. You're probably going to let both of them walk. And you're going to have about $8.5 million in cap space to play with next season. So maybe you want to go out and acquire a star player for whatever it's going to take, or at least just shedding contracts. You're not going to have to worry about that too much. Nobody here is making an exorbitant amount of money, but what you do see is a bunch of guys making a good amount of money, and it's reflected in the overalls, right? A guy like Jake Neighbors has a 2-year extension, and you're going to have to worry about after next season. But you do get some relief immediately. Cam Fowler, Nick Leddy, Joseph not going to be making $3 million. Holloway, right? You're going to give him an extension, but Tessier, if he pans out, maybe, but $2 million might be an overpay for him. So you are going to get incremental value to pop up there. And by year number 3, you have $28 million in cap space. So it's one of those, You might not be able to compete immediately, and you're going to have to tell Thomas and Kyrou to be a little bit patient because the help is coming. We just need to worry about these 4 guys right here with the no trade clause in their early 30s. They're fine players, but you're definitely going to need to add some more talent that is better than they are if you're going to make a serious run at the Cup. The Eastern Conference medium rebuild team that I'm going to be taking a look at is the New York Islanders. This is a team that is notorious for lacking star power, but having a sum of its parts kind of mentality, and you can see that reflected in the roster construction. However, in recent years, they have fallen off from their previous highs and making, 1 or 2 round runs in the postseason. I don't think that they were ever going to win the Stanley Cup, but they've got a really solid core. And we'll start at the blue line, right? Or in the goal, I should say, which is where they are really, flush with talent. They've got Ilya Sorokin, an elite goaltender, 90 overall, 29 years old, has a no movement clause, and then his running mate is Semyon Varlamov, 83 at 36, 3 years left at 2.75. So it's not a terrible goaltending tandem as far as cap and quality. The quality is actually really high, but to have these guys making about $11 million for the next 3 seasons, I think it's fine. You can get away with it, and you really don't have to look for a goaltender of the future for at least a few years because Sorokin is locked up. $8.25 million, I think, is a really good contract. Goaltenders start to ask for quite a bit down the line. And then you look at the blue line. It's a really solid blue line, if you ask me. To have 3 guys at an 87 or higher, I think is perfect, especially when you've got a guy like Noah Dobson. And while I mentioned that this team doesn't have a ton of elite talent, here's your exception to that statement. 88, medium elite, 24-year-old right shot defenseman with a tape-to-tape gold X factor, one just tremendous player. He'll do great in the sim, and he'll be fun to play with if you guys are playing the games. And he's signed for just 1 more year at $4 million. So you will have to extend him. We'll take a look at the extension soon. But Pulock and Pelech here, they're making about 11-ish, 12-ish million for the next 5 seasons combined. So they're a good 1-2 punch. Maybe somebody, Pelech probably plays with Dobson, and then Pulock can kind of carry your second pairing. So it's not the end of the world to have those guys at those contracts, even with the no trade clause. Mayfield, this is a tough one. 6 years at $3.5 million, 31-year-old, 81 overall. I mean, he's just a guy that you probably don't want to be paying that much money to for that long. You'd love to have him at 3 or less. It is what it is, and you might have to just kind of convince him to no longer want that no trade clauses. You can get out of the deal in year number 4. That is a long time to wait, but he's at least serviceable as an 81. If you get him to fit the chemistry as a defensive defenseman, he could be fine for your third pairing, but it's less than ideal. And then we get to the forward core, and guys, this is in rough shape. Barzal is 27. He's got no more room to grow outside of statistical growth. You've got Bo Horvat making $8.5 million, and 87 is not bad. Again, he's 29 with a no trade clause. But these 2 guys, I think, are fine, and I think they're paid maybe a little bit more expensively than you'd love to see. But then you get to Brock Nelson, who's making $6 million. He's an expiring asset. Do you just try and kind of tear down and then build around Barzal and Horvat quickly with whatever picks or prospects or players you can get for them? Anthony Duclair, I think, is a solid player for 4 years. I think that's a very good contract. You're not going to want to be moving that one. He's certainly a good enough to be on the second line, especially in the middle 6. Anders Lee, though, is making $7 million for another year. Good news here, guys, is only a modified no trade clause. So you are going to have to navigate the age, the contracts, and the lack of elite talent coming up. If we take a look at their rookie skaters, well, there's not much here, right? Siplikov is the only guy that has medium top 6 or better. Everybody else is medium top 9, medium top 6. So you desperately need a second wave, a next generation, because there is not a savior in this pipeline. Anybody that is good is already on the wrong side of the age curve. They're past, they're either in their prime or past their prime in their 30s or mid to late 20s. So there's really the only guy you're looking at that has any room to develop, and that's not what you want to see. The good news is, though, for the New York Islanders, is they have picks, right? They've got all their picks. Yes, they don't have next year's second, but you can work around it, or next year's 5th. They have picks. You can deal these picks. You can use these picks to draft that next generation like I'm talking about. But the good news is there is flexibility here for the New York Islanders. So I think this is one that you're going to have to be tactical about with Barzal and Horvat. And then you've got your 3 blue liners that are really guys for the future. But outside of that, I think this roster does need a lot of help. I think you can get that help, which is why they're only in the medium bucket. Let's take a look at the contracts. And when it comes to the contract situation, you don't necessarily have a ton of cap space, probably about 8.5 to 9 million next season, and you're going to want to give most of that to Noah Dobson. Brock Nelson at 32 and Kyle Palmieri at 33. Maybe they're guys you're better off selling now for whatever asset you can get. I know they've got X factors, or at least Brock Nelson does, but he should be able to fetch you a decent return. Nothing spectacular, but maybe an 83, like another Cyplikov, right? Some of these guys in this range, you could get very, very sneaky and get some pretty good players out of your aging stars. Taking a look at the rest of the roster, though, as far as like next season guys you could move on from, Anders Lee, 100%, like first guy that I'm looking to move on from, no matter the cost. He's got a modified no trade clause. You can get rid of him. He's got no say really except to a certain amount of teams. And it's that $7 million. You'd then have about $15 million to go ahead and bring back your guys like Boqvist if you wanted, but most likely Dobson here, or Romanov or Cyplikov, right? You could get these guys back if you moved on from Brock Nelson. I think it's one of those, not Brock Nelson, excuse me, Anders Lee with that $7 million, because he's probably one of the only guys you could. There's also Engvall, who's making $3 million. Oh my good Lord. Yeah, not a great contract, but it is movable, right? Casey Cizikas, not a terrible contract, but also movable. That's the thing. A lot of the bad contracts are movable, and some of the less than ideal contracts, you can live with those. You can make do with those. So I think the New York Islanders are a pretty interesting team here in this middle bucket. But now, guys, let's jump into the difficult rebuilds, our hard category. And the Western Conference team in the hard category are the Calgary Flames. And I had a tough time finding a quote-unquote hard rebuild in the Western Conference. I think it's a little bit easier in the Eastern Conference. I knew where to jump to immediately. But with the Western Conference, there's no team that is in a terrible position. There's ones better than others, but I don't know if I'd classify many teams as the hard bucket. But for the sake of picking one, I chose the Calgary Flames, and that's simply because they're a team in a weird spot. You aren't going to be able to win right away with this team. They don't have a ton of future talent. They do have picks, but some of these contract guys are bad. But let's go ahead, start like we always do in the between the pipes, the goaltending. You're set, right? Dustin Wolf, one of those guys I told the Blue Jackets GM to go after. He's signed for another year at $0.85 million as a medium elite. He is your goaltender of the future. And Vladar's a fine backup. This is going to be a fine goaltending tandem. You don't really have to worry about goaltending. But that's about the only thing you don't have to worry about here in Calgary. You've got Rasmus Andersson and Mackenzie Weegar. Those are your two stars. After that, it drops off pretty significantly, guys. You go from an 87 to an 82. Your middle pairing looks like most contenders' third pairings, which is not where you want to be. And here's the thing. Rasmus Andersson is going to need a contract extension after this season. You can start talking to him, but at 4.5 for an 88 overall, that's a fantastic contract. However, Mackenzie Weegar is 30 and makes 6.25 for the next 7 years. Now, he's worth it in the first couple of years, and it does convert to a modified no-trade clause in year number 4, a very, very common theme we've seen here throughout this video. 3 years of a no-trade clause for Mackenzie Weegar, not really that bad. I'm not really too upset about that, and then you can move on from him in the future, but he's not going to help you do what you need to do, and I think that's tear it down here. You need to spread out your assets so you can get more talent that could grow, and really just, there's no bottom to this roster. And we take a look at the forwards, there's really no top end to this roster either. Nazem Kadri and Jonathan Huberdeau are your best two players. They both have no movement clauses, meaning they're going to be virtually impossible to do anything with but buy them out. And Jonathan Huberdeau's contract is absolutely atrocious. You're paying a 31-year-old, 86 overall guy $10.5 million for 7 seasons. Sure, he's got a couple X factors, but his defense is not good. He's pretty average. He really screams second line left winger to me. And you've got a no movement clause for 5 seasons until he's 36. You cannot move on from this guy unless you bully him with morale off. You cannot move on from him. So you're stuck with $10.5 million. And though cap is not necessarily an issue, you would love to maybe get a return on a guy who's 31 and isn't going to help the team go in the direction you want. Same thing with Nazem Kadri, right? 5 years at $7 million. it's not great. The cap going up does help, and after the first 2 seasons, you can move on from him, but he'll be 35. Will he still be an 86 at that point? I have no idea. Coleman here is your 3rd best forward at an 84. You don't have any first-line talent. You barely have 2 second-line talent, and Coleman, to me, is a low-end second-liner, high-end third-line power forward. He's fine. To me, he is what he is, but at 32, you really want to move in a different direction because this team isn't winning now. And the same thing with Backlund, but here's the thing. You can't. He has a no-movement clause. He's 35. Yes, he's only signed for 2 years, but you can't move on from him when you want to move on from him. It does turn into a modified no-trade clause. You can trade him at the draft, but at that point, he'll be 36. Will he drop off a little bit? How much value is he actually going to have and get? It's not like cap is an issue. This team has a lot of change to do, right? There has to be so much turnover on this team. And you take a look at the potential players. Yes, Frost has a medium elite, but he's already 25 and only an 82 overall. He'd have to have some insane growth in 1 year for him to be that savior, that medium elite, that first line center who's going to be an 89, 90 overall. You've got Sharon Govich, who is due for a contract extension. Wow, is actually getting a 5-year, $5.7 million contract for an 83 who's really not going to grow. That's not a good contract. And I don't know if he's got a modified no-trade clause, so you could move it if you wanted to. And you got Coronado here, who's probably your best bet at developing into something meaningful. He's 82, 21, but again, he's a sniper. I just don't see him becoming that number 1 guy you need. This is one of those where there's a lot of meh, no elite, and you're not in a good spot right now. You can't really move on from your players that you want to move on from, like Backlund, Huberdeau, Kadri, even Weegar if you wanted to maybe get a little bit younger. Anderson's going to need a contract extension. So this team, while it does have draft picks, and yes, you have 2 draft picks this year, you've got 2 first-rounders next year, as well as multiple thirds, you've got your seconds, so you've got your picks. But I find you to be hard-pressed to win something very, very quickly with the Calgary Flames. And with the Flames, guys, we'll take a look at the contracts, but I did want to mention, you don't have your own first. That's the one thing I kind of glossed over there a second ago. You don't have your own first, so if your goal is to tank, you're not helping yourself out. You do have 2 firsts, but they're from I believe the Devils and I want to say it's like the Avs or something like that. Anyway, it's 2 good teams that are going to make the playoffs and probably be picking in the late first round. So despite how bad your first season may go, you cannot get a lottery pick unless one of those 2 teams really does bottom out. But we'll take a look at the expiring contracts. It's really nobody. Frost, sure. Coronado, yeah, probably the guy you want to give a contract to. Ball is third pairing defenseman. He can be a good third pairing or a low-end middle pairing, but Connor Zary as well. There's really not much you're going to have to pay here, guys. And with the cap going up by about $5.5 million, you're going to have about $23-24 million in cap space. This is the kind of team that, do you make a run at Mikko Rantanen? Do you even want to? Because this team is aging. Are you going to stick Mikko Rantanen's $14 million cap hit on this team and say that's a cup contender? There's more you can do, sure, in a couple years, but maybe getting a guy like Rantanen for free for just cap space could be the thing that does turn this roster around. But is Rantanen gonna make it to free agency? Are some of those top end guys gonna make it there with the new roster update and having being moved to the Hurricanes? He probably will, but will those elite guys be out there? Will you be willing to sign them? And will they be the difference on this team? So there really isn't much to be concerned about other than the fact that your big contracts are here for a while, and the top 3 are pretty hard to move. So if you're up for a challenge and you got some patience or some clever ideas, I think the Calgary Flames for the Western Conference are a great team to pick if you really, really want a challenge. But they are nowhere near the challenge as our Eastern Conference team. And that Eastern Conference team debuted on last year's top 5 teams to rebuild as well, but it is the Boston Bruins in a loaded Atlantic division with teams with young talent, with teams that have already established cores like Toronto, like Florida. You've got Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa, who often see themselves develop. Montreal as well. Tampa Bay still has really good talent. So you're in a tough division, and oh boy, is it going to be tough to make changes to this roster. Yes, you've got David Pastrnak. Yes, you've got Charlie McAvoy. Yes, you've got Sway in goal. And they are all signed to, reasonable contracts, what they should be earning. But outside of that, it is pretty tough to say we can massage this roster to something we want it to be. Your third best skater is Brad Marchand. He's 36 and he's on an expiring contract. Do you move on from him in year number 1 because he only has that modified no trade clause? Or do you hold on to him and hope that you can make one more run at it, just like the Bruins are kind of doing right now? You've got Hampus Lindholm on the blue line, who I think is paid fine. But at 30, with 6 years left, he's got a 30-team no-trade clause for the first 3 years. And then in year number 4, when he's turning 34, 35, then it really opens up. But at 6.5, it's really not too terrible. But is this team really a cup contender as it is currently built? We'll go ahead and take a look at the goalies. And obviously, like I mentioned, it's Jeremy Swayman. He's signed for 8 years at 8.25. He's medium elite. He's 87 overall. He can definitely get to be that 90 overall. He's got elite X factors as well. With Jonas Korpisalo as his backup, $3 million is probably too much for me to pay a backup, especially in the sim. So that's probably a contract I'm looking to move on from. And hey, there you go. You get $3 million right there if you move on from Korpisalo, but definitely find a backup goaltender. Looking at the blue line, though, you've got Carlo, who is a solid player and paid well, but 27, maybe on the way to the decline of his career. But really the big one here is Nikita Zadorov. 6 years at $5 million with a no movement clause for an 84. For a team that does not have cap space in the coming years, feels like an albatross of a contract. For example, you're going to need to pay Mason Lohrei after year number 1. Yes, he's making an ELC, but he's going to hopefully develop to be better than Zadorov. He's 6 years younger, and he's probably going to ask for something very similar to that. I could see $4.5 million totally being the ask for Mason Lohrei. And you look at the blue liners of the future, there's not many. You've got Lohrei, and that's about it. Everybody else is projected to be a bottom guy, and, well, nobody's really got that developmental curve to get there. So you've got a couple players, McAvoy, Lindholm, Carlo, and Lohrei. You need some depth defensemen. Is it really peak for you? Are you keeping Zadorov around at $5 million if you really don't have much of a choice? The blue line is good, but the contract situation really leaves you scratching your head. And then we just take a look at the forward core. And this is really where things for the Bruins have fallen off mightily. Pastrnak, still a franchise dude, 94, 28. How many more years? You probably got 5 more years of him at a great, performance and overall. But you need to surround him sooner rather than later to go ahead and make a run at the cup and make sure that he continues to put up great statistical numbers so that he continues to be a 94 overall. You've got Brad Marchand. Maybe you keep him around for 1 year, but at 36, feels like you're never going to see this kind of value again for a guy like Brad Marchand. And do you really want to extend him? He's due for a contract extension. He's 36. Yes, he's 89, but maybe you move on from him. Maybe that's heresy for Bruins fans, but it might be the sad reality when you're playing franchise mode here. Charlie Coyle, is fine, but 5.25 for a third-line power forward, low-end second liner, if you will. Yeah, it's all right, and you can move him to a good amount of teams in the league, and this could help you free up cap space. But this one is the big one, guys, and I've kind of been glossing over it. But Elias Lindholm making 7 years at 7.7 is just absolutely absurd, and you can't get out of this contract until the final year. Again, morale off, bully him, sure, get lucky with one click, but 7.75 for a guy who's 84 overall. Yes, he's listed as a second liner. Some of the underlines look a little bit better, and he does have X factors, but he's already 29. It just doesn't feel like this is the kind of guy that is going to help Pastrnak. He's not going to center Pastrnak to a cup. Like, let's be honest. And then Pavel Zacha, same thing. Now, he's certainly not as bad when it comes to cap hit and what he is and what you would move him for. But it's not good either. And we'll take a look at the contract situation, guys, because it gets a little hairy. And if you were hoping to move on from some of those contracts, well, these top 3 guys you really can't move from. You're not moving McAvoy or Pastrnak, let's be honest. But Lindholm, no movement clause. You might be able to move on from Lindholm or Coyle, right, with their modified no trade clauses in here, right? Lindholm's got a 30-team no trade clause, and then Coyle has a, only 8. So you might be able to move these guys to teams they want to go to, but Nikita Zadorov, not looking great. Do you move on from Zacha and Carlo just because they're, not the best? I mean, I think their contracts are fine. You probably want to move on from Peak, who's making almost $3 million. And then you've got some depth guys making okay money. But then you look at what you're going to need to sign next season. And it immediately starts with Brad Marchand. And you keep him, do you move him? But you really look at some of the guys that are the future, potential future of the Bruins. You've got Geeky, who's got a little bit of room to grow. Frederick, who's got a little bit of room to grow. And Lori, who's got lots of room to grow. They're not really there. 83 at 26. Maybe he develops a little bit to be an 85 if you're lucky. Same thing with Frederick. Do these guys become an 85? And then you've got 2 second liners. That's great, but you're still lacking in that top end first line talent. If you have an 85 here and get rid of Brad Marchand, it doesn't look very good. And the thing is, there's not a lot of cap space. If the cap goes up by about 5.5, which it usually does, you're staring at a whopping $6 million in cap space. Sure, you might be able to free some more up if you move on from Zacha, but then you're stripping away that talent to replace it with a like for like. So you replace Zacha with Frederick. There's not really much to split between the two of these guys. And depending on what they want, I just have no idea how you're going to manage the cap. It's definitely doable, but you're going to have to get tricky and calculated and get smart when it comes to who you're going to move on from, and maybe even get just a little lucky with who develops and who grows. But there is not much room to open up more cap space and sign more depth or get more top-end talent that's making $6-7 million. You're going to have to find some good contracts and give up assets to get those, and hopefully clear up enough cap space that you can bring those guys in. And the one saving grace with the Bruins, though, you do have most of your quality picks. You've got next year's 1, 2, and 3. You've got a 1 and 3 this year. You're just missing your 2 and 4. You're not looking too terrible when it comes to futures missing. You have a third missing in 2027, and then it goes back to having all your picks in 2028. So it's not like you're completely devoid of picks, but you don't have too many assets that I'd be willing to move. Your first, maybe if you want to make another run at it or you find the dude. But as far as what the Bruins potentially have, it's gonna take some calculated moves here to free up cap space and get new players in. But those are the 6 teams in the easy, medium, and hard buckets that I have decided that you guys should rebuild for your next team. Do you have an idea of a team that could be fun? Maybe there's one that I missed. I had to be selective. I had to pick one per conference, per bucket here, per difficulty. So if you guys have a different one that you like, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section and help each other out. If you have ideas on how to get the Bruins to be a contender, or maybe ways to spice up your Columbus Blue Jackets rebuild, let the community know down in the comment section, guys. But I appreciate you guys making this far into the video. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.